Welcome back to the shop, everybody. Today's video takes place in 2022 week 49, December 5th to December 11th. And we are going to start off just by opening up some boxes that I've received, check all the parts, do all that good fun stuff that we gotta do when we get new parts. So it looks like we're opening up some stuff from Modern Driveline. I do believe this is going to be a couple of new flywheels. So I got a 28 ounce balanced flywheel for the current engine, and I got a 0 degree balance flywheel for when I build the new engine. It's going to be internally balanced. And then that right there, I believe, is my Milton throwout bearing, Milton hydraulic throwout bearing. And I got some flywheel bolts, and I got some pressure plate bolts. But as it turns out, Modern Driveline sent me flywheel bolts for a a flathead Ford and not my small block Ford. So yeah, kind of unfortunate that I paid for bolts I'm never going to use, but you know, I really should have checked the order before I paid for it. Lesson learned: double check and triple check. You know, trust but verify. So what I'm doing is I am just throwing the flywheels up on the bench or on the shelf there, and I'm writing heavy on them because they are heavy, and even the 3/4 inch shelf is bowing, so it is pretty heavy. So that right there in the middle of the bench is my power steering pump bracket that I got from LMR. So that's the newer style bracket, or the bracket that's needed to be used with AC. So what I'm doing is I got my camera set up, and I'm doing a instructional video on how to pull the pulley off of the power steering pump. It requires a special puller and stuff like that, so I'm just getting all of that set up. So what I'm doing right now is I just want to check and make sure that this power steering pump bracket is going to fit on the car, and kind of just see where it's going to sit. Yeah, it's going to sit no problem. It is the right bracket. It's exactly what I need. So this right here is I'm doing more instructional video on how to install a Pro charger when you have AC and power steering, and at this point in time TMZ engine plate. And as we know, I think I've hopefully mentioned this in a previous video, the TMZ engine plate, I can't do it with the Pro charger and AC and power steering, and it's just not going to work. So as you can see in this shot, I've got the new engine plate just kind of mocked out there on cardboard, and that's how we're going to sit the engine in a car. So at some point in time in the future, I will remove that TMZ engine plate and not use it. It just gets in the way of everything that I'm trying to do on this car. As much as I'd like to use it, it's not going to work in my application. So now that we know that power steering bracket is going to work, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the old pulley off of the pump, and we will you need to pull the pulley off because there's 3 bolts behind it that bolt the power steering pump to the bracket, and the bracket doesn't have a slot in it anywhere to just kind of slide the pump off after you get the bolts out. And I believe that the bolts, you couldn't back them off because they're going to hit the pulley anyways, so you have to pull the pulley or the pulley off in order to get that pump off the bracket. So right now I'm just trying to figure out how this all works on my own. I don't know why there are instructions. So here I am reading the instructions. It would have been so much easier had I just read the instructions from the first part instead of trying to figure it out on my own. But that's the type of person I am. I generally like to try and do something on my own before I, reach out. I just like to figure things out. It's kind of just part of who I am. So this is me doing the instructional video and going through it. So yeah, I'm just gonna do the instructional video on how to get that off as I go through installing the puller on the tool. Yeah, so I'm just figuring out all of the different wrenches and stuff that I'm going to need in order to do this. now that I've got the tool kind of sorted out, I give a brief attempt to get this pulley off on the bench before quickly realizing, yeah, that's not gonna work. It's on there too good. So I take this over to my vise, which I will bring you along for the ride, getting a few other things set up. You're not missing anything right now, let me tell you. But this does give you a great opportunity to look at the mess that is on the back wall of my shop. But yeah, so I got the whole bracket in the vise, and this is how I'm going to try and get that pulley off of there. So while I'm trying to do this, you know, I make a little bit of movement, and then the wrench just slips, and you know, with the wrench it's almost impossible to move. So what I do is, off camera, I just throw a little bit of ATF on the a little bit of ATF and acetone on top of the shaft to hopefully get a little bit of penetrating oil down in there, just to make it a little bit easier. But ultimately what I also did is I stopped using the 10mm wrench, and I go to a 10mm socket on a breaker bar, and I have much better success with that. The wrench, the box end, it just slipped, so either, you know, it was just too much pressure for it, and it just opened up and slipped, or whatever. But yeah, so moving to the 3-inch breaker bar with the 10mm sockets, much better effect, and you can see in this sped up video that, you know, that pulley is coming off of there pretty nicely, pretty easily with this. So after I pulled my head on my ass and stopped using a wrench and used, you know, something with a little bit more leverage, it comes off just fine. And hey, now that I'm doing this video for you, you guys also know, if you are ever pulling the power steering pulley off of the pump, not to use a wrench. Use a small breaker bar and a socket, and you'll have a much easier time. So now that I have the pulley off of the pump, I can take a little bit of sandpaper and just clean up the shaft. There's a little bit of pitting and a little bit of, I guess, rust. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but I just wanted to clean it up so that it'll make the reinstall a little bit easier. I'm using 1500 grit sandpaper on there. It cleans it up just nice. So to reinstall this, there's that little threaded bolt that goes into the shaft, and what I noticed is the threads, the internal threads on the inside of that shaft are rusted to hell. So what I'm gonna have to do is I'm gonna have to run a tap down there and tap it out just to be able to get the installer in. So what I did is I grabbed the little installer bolt, and I'm going over to my tap and die set, and I am figuring out the thread pitch and the size and all of that stuff in order to choose the correct tap to go into the shaft. And you can see in this shot of the power steering pump, there's 3 bolts holding it on. And you can kind of see now with the pulley off how those bolts sit under the pulley. So it would be impossible to get the pump off of that bracket with the pulley still installed. Another thing I'll mention since we've got time is, even though I've had that power steering pump off of the car for probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 months, every time I move it or every time I do anything with it, it just leaks more ATF. Like, it's almost like this thing has just a never-ending supply of ATF. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if there were some gnomes that came into the shop every night and just added another, like, you know, few ounces to the reservoir just so that the next time that I moved it, it puked more out. It just, yeah, it seems like a never-ending supply of fluid coming out of that thing. So now I have chosen the tap that I'm going to use, and so I start threading it in. Everything looks okay. And then what I need to do is I need to grab a big set of channel locks just to hold the shaft on the pump. I considered like sticking a screwdriver or something into the pump itself, but then I kind of thought to myself, that's probably not going to be a great thing to do. So I would rather just, you know, grab onto the shaft of the pump and do that. So that's what I did. Yeah, I don't know why I tried with the pliers. That was just a waste of time. But in order to get a really good grip, what I ended up doing is, I think I end up like getting in such a position where it's kind of, the one handle is kind of pressed against the vise, and then I'm kind of using my body weight to lean into it to get a really, really good grip on it. And the main reason for that is I need that tap all the way down, because when I'm reinstalling the pulley, I don't want to strip those threads out. So yeah, I was able to get it all tapped. I was happy with it. The threads looked much better on the inside. And I'm just pulling these bolts off so I can get the pump off. If I recall correctly, it's a 17mm socket on there. But watch the instructional video when it comes out, if it comes out with this, and then I talk about all the tools that I use and go through the whole process. So we're going to do just a little bit of cleanup, and then we're going to do reinstall the pulley? I don't remember. Let's see where we go. I'm just gonna finish pulling off the finish pulling the pump off of the brackets, and then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to use a little bit of brake clean and clean off the housing. It's been on the car for a long time. It's got a lot of dirt and a lot of grime on it. So take a bristle brush, a little bit of brake clean, and just clean it up best I can. I'll probably end up cleaning this up more later. Probably use like a degreaser or something else, but just get it, you know, cleaner. For what I'm doing, this will be fine enough for now though. So like most fox bodies, this pump whines when you turn. And in my opinion, that's just part of the fox body charm. Some people hate the whine. I actually don't mind it. So I'm not planning on replacing the pump at this point. There's no need to. It didn't leak. It still worked. So my plan at the moment is to keep using it. So the new bracket did in fact come with new ARP bolts. But since I know I will have this pump off at least one more time, I'm just going to use the old bolts for the moment, so that's just for mock-up. I could have used the new bolts, but I was like, meh, I'll reinstall those later. So now I'm going through the instructions and figuring out how to reinstall the pulley. It was a fairly quick process if I recall correctly. It was fairly easy too. But again, watch the instructional video when it comes out and you'll get the full scoop. So as we can see, I'm able to reinstall the pulley just on the bench. It probably would have been a little bit easier if I had taken this over to the vise, and I'm not entirely sure why I didn't, but I didn't, and we were able to get it installed on the bench, and, no harm. Yeah, that did take a little bit of work, but we got the pulley on, no big deal. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just set it up to do the intro. I'm redoing the intro to my instructional video now that I have all of the tools needed that I used. So there's going to be a little bit of film magic where the start of the video is actually at the end of the project, and I think that's what I'm going to do for a lot of the instructional videos. That way I can lay out the tools and the pieces that I used. So it does take me a couple of takes to get exactly what I wanted. So yeah, I'm showing you all that. I mean, I could have cut it out of the video, but enjoy. Or don't. That's up to you. Now that that's done, let's clean up the shop a little bit. shop cleaned up a little bit, we can get back onto this output harness. And I know that's the output harness because there's only like 6 wires on it, and there's no O2 sensor input. So let's see here, what am I gonna do? I don't know what I'm doing here. Just making sure I got all the right wires, I guess. And probably taping it up. Nope, we're just gonna start getting it right in the car and get it laid out. So what I'm also doing is replacing, I believe it's pin J1A2, and that's the wire that the Holley sends out to trigger the fuel pump and the coils and, you know, anything else, or the fuel injectors. And the reason why I'm replacing it is this is the Holley unterminated harness, and they had that wire going to their own relay, which you can kind of see on the back tray. There's a mess of wires and a little black and blue box there that I cut out. So I reran a new one because when I cut it, it was too short to go where I needed. But luckily in one of the other harnesses that I got, they had another red wire that was longer, so I swapped out the old short one for the new one. Okay, so we are back to working on the input harness, and what I'm actually doing here is I am pulling out the VSS wire, and I want to say a sensor ground wire or a sensor plus 12. No, I think it's the sensor ground and the VSS wire. Now, the reason why I'm pulling this out of the input harness is off camera, I've done a ton of research on how to drive a speedometer off the Dominator, and the way it works is the Dominator has a speedometer output pin, which is on the transmission input output harness connector, which I believe is J5. I think it's J5. And so they're expecting the VSS input signal into the transmission harness in order for it to output to a speedometer. On all the research I did, I looked to see if you could configure VSS on just a normal input and then still use the transmission speedometer output. And I did not get conclusive results. I didn't get the concrete answer I was looking for. So I was like, well, since I don't have the answer I'm looking for, I'm gonna do what I know works, which is put the VSS vehicle speed sensor wire into the transmission input harness where it expects to be, which I want to say is pin 18. I could be wrong on that, so don't quote me. And then I'll use the speedometer output from there. So essentially, in order to drive the speedometer, I need to buy another connector for, I think it's 3 wires. I need a sensor ground, I need a VSS input, and then I need a speedometer output. I literally need 3 wires, just because Holley doesn't support having a VSS input and a speedometer output anywhere else on their anywhere else on their connections on the Dominator. It's kind of frustrating, I'm not gonna lie, but at the end of the day, it should hopefully work. So now that I have those wires pulled out of the input harness, I can put the input harness back in the car yet again. So one of the things is that I know a lot of people run the Holley digital dash, which I think you can have the speedometer built into that, so your VSS could be on any of the inputs. But myself, I like analog gauges. I don't know. I don't really care for the digital dashes so much. I really like having analog gauges. I just like the look of it. I like, the clean sweep of it. I don't like how on the digital ones they can kind of jump and lag, like it's not always a clean sweep. Maybe it is now, but some of the ones that I saw, like it just kind of jumps all over, especially if you have like a tack which is digital. It kind of, I don't know, goes from like 1200 to 1500. I don't know, I like the needle sweeping on the gauges. So I think if you had the digital dash, or if you had digital gauges, you probably don't need the VSS input on the transmission harness like I do, but because I'm driving a analog gauge, I need this output. Alright, so you've seen this a whole bunch from me before, but I'm going to spend a pile of time on cable management and getting those harnesses kind of routed in the car. It's crazy how quickly you can go from just a mess of wires to a relatively neat and organized pile of wires. The progression is just interesting to me. It's fascinating. Well, looks like we're back to a huge mess of wires everywhere. But that's okay, as you saw before. We'll get this kind of sorted out and squared away and we'll make it look good again. Alright, so you may be familiar with this harness. This is the output harness. So why do I have this back out of the car? Well, that's because I realized I'm missing like 4 or 5 of the outputs on it. So in the Holly software, I went to the output section and I printed off the sheet, but I didn't print out all of the outputs. I'm missing the warning output, the caution outputs. I think I forgot maybe the shift light output, and maybe another light that I don't quite recall. But yeah, so some of those outputs just weren't on the list, so I am adding additional wires into the output harness to accommodate those. Now that we have the wires in there, we can, do some routing on the input and the output harness and kind of get all of this stuff cleaned up. correctly, in one of the previous videos I pulled the line lock wire out. So this is me grabbing the line lock wire and putting it back in so that I can, because I need to feed a wire from the relay board all the way to the driver's side front of the car. So that's what this one is, I believe. So I pulled the wiring for the switch panel out, and I'm just thinking about what to do here. I know that I need a power wire and then I need some trigger wires. I'm thinking, do I want to add more wires? Do I want to replace these wires? Because these are fairly heavy gauge for just triggering relays. Like, reality is I could get away with like 22 gauge instead of 18. So yeah, just some thinking and pondering. But as you can see, I just decided to put them right back into the car, and then we'll get back into some cable management. So what I'm doing now is I also need to run a fuel pump wire, so I'm just trying to figure out what gauge I need to run. So that was a 10 gauge wire I just had in my hand, and this is a 12 gauge wire. So I'm just comparing the size of the what's the word I'm looking for here, the size of the conductors, to make sure that I use the same gauge wire. So yeah, I fully believe that 12 gauge is more than sufficient to run that pump. That's what the wire coming out of the pump is. So I could of course run a bigger wire and then step it down. I don't see any point to that though, so I'm just going to use the same size gauge coming right off my relay. So I just looked up the pump instructions, and the pump instructions do say to run a 10 gauge wire, but it also claims that the wire coming off the pump is a 10 gauge, which from the measurements I just took, my 12 gauge wire is the same size wire as the wire on the pump, so I'm okay with keeping the same size wire the entire way through. Now that I have a lot of this wire cleaned up, I'm going to start to pull everything off the panel and get the panel off. And the reason being is I need to mount the larger studs, like the red stud at the bottom right of the panel right now. That needs to be mounted on, and I need a second one. So I don't necessarily need to pull the panel out of the car, but I'm going to. I also need to drill some holes for some cable management. I need to put some like zip tie holders on the plate, so it's just easier to do that with it out of the car. So after pulling the plate out of the car, we are going to do a little bit of cleanup because I need access to my bench and just to make my life a little bit easier. Now that we got some cleanup done, we can start doing a little bit of planning and trying to figure out where I want to put these two studs. Yeah, it just takes a little bit of time. Right there are the plastic kind of cable tie downs. So zip tie just loops through and holds the wiring on. So I'm just trying to figure out the best placement for all this stuff. because I have a square in the house and I want to use that to make a nice straight line. So now that I have that, we can make those nice straight lines. And since I realized I'm not happy with that line, I want to use some acetone in order to remove the Sharpie, but first I need to refill the bottle because it was empty. So, as I'm getting this all marked out and center punched and everything else, that acetone bottle is getting dangerously close to the front of the table, and I don't really notice or pay attention to it. Well, it's going to become relevant in a little bit here. And boom, there she goes. Just knocked the acetone bottle off of the bench, which normally isn't a big deal. And I'm just going to continue on working, drilling all the holes that I just center punched and got ready. I'm just grabbing all of the hardware that I need to install this stuff onto the board, and as I walk back, I can smell the acetone. The top of the bottle broke, so I just quickly throw it on a couple of rags just to kind of start soaking some of this stuff up, clean off some of the parts that got covered, and just kind of assess how much more there needs to get sucked up. And acetone is essentially just nail polish remover. So if you ever open a bottle of nail polish remover and you know how strong it is, the fumes are fairly strong, but I figure, I know acetone evaporates and, you know, I have the cardboard there, but yeah, I need to open up the door just to start getting some of the fumes evacuated while I continue working on this. Well, I've got this kind of started, and enough is enough. Those fumes are terrible. Like, I'm just huffing chemical at this point in time. So yeah, open the door fully, start getting it aired out, clean it up, get that cardboard out of the shop because it was soaked, clean up the rest of this mess. Like, you just saw me fill up that container with acetone and then all of it spilled out because the lid broke when it fell. So yeah, it kind of sucked. Losing that bottle. I had to order a few more. But now that the shop's cleaned out, we are going to continue reassembling all of this stuff on that board. So the only hardware that I had in the shop was like 1.5 inch long studs. So yeah, just take my die grinder and just knock them short. With those on, we can start getting the rest of the board put back together. So my relay board and then the terminal strip. And now we can get this plate back in the car and continue on with some more cable management now that we have a little bit more of an idea as to where things are going to go. finally, I can't just zip tie wires all day, every day. At some point in time, I actually need to get my button gear and start terminating some of this stuff. You know, as always, when I cut these wires super short, it's always nerve-wracking because, you know, I'm kind of committing to a place and I don't really have any more options after that. But I've committed to the place. This panel is perfect. It's what I want. It's the right size. Everything fits on it. It's nice. I can add more later if I absolutely have to. So yeah, I'm going to start terminating wires onto the terminal strip. So the right side of that terminal strip are all of the wires going to the relay board, and that's just telling the relay board which relay to trigger. And then the left side will be all of the inputs. So on the left side, I'll have the switches from on the dash bar that'll tell it to turn stuff on, and that'll also be my outputs from the Holly telling it to turn things on. But before I do any of that, I'm going to go off on a tangent here, and I'm going to start working with my new label maker and try and figure out how the I've got heat shrink labels that will go on top of wire loom. So I'm just trying to figure out how that's all going to work. I don't really know why I went off on this tangent at this exact moment in time. Maybe I thought I needed to do all of the labels before I crimped any of the ends. But in any case, I did go off on this tangent, and you're along for the ride. So I think I have 3 different sizes of heat shrink labels in there. I think I've got quarter, half, and 3/4 is what's available. And I ended up just using the 3/4 because neither of the other size fit over the like 3/8 loom even. So this is just me kind of playing with it and getting it sorted out and understanding how it prints and the sizing and all that fun stuff. And so I want to see how this actually looks on loom and how it works. So I just grab a small chunk of loom. That's the smallest loom that I have in the shop, and that's kind of what I would be using to go right up to those wires. So yeah, just checking to see which size of the shrink tape will actually fit over it. And yeah, I ended up having to use the 3/4 inch stuff. And so I actually test print a label, and then I put it onto the actual loom, and then I actually heat shrink it. You know, at the end of the day, the product that came out was really, really nice. I'm really happy with it, and I've used it since then, and I do like it a lot. But part of it is I need to just play with it more and figure some things out. So this is what it's going to look like on the cable, and as I say, it turns out really nice. I'm really happy with it, and after going off on this tangent, I don't even use it right now. So I don't know why I went off on this tangent, but my brain just said, hey, go check this out and see what needs to happen. Now that we're done with that, we are going to get back into the cart, and we are going to start terminating those relay trigger wires. mentioned earlier, I actually replaced the J1A2 wire, which is the wire coming off the Dominator to tell the fuel pump and the coils and the injectors to turn on. I replaced that with a longer one. So what I'm doing now is I ran that wire into the first terminal with a second wire, and then that second wire is going to loop out into another terminal, and I'm going to do the same thing on 5 or 6 of them, I think. Maybe it's not that much. But yeah, so I just chain a few of the input triggers together because it's all going to be turning on at the same time. Yeah, I think it's water pump, fuel injector A, fuel injector side A, B, C, D, or 1, 2, 3, 4, fuel injector 5, 6, 7, 8, coils 1, 2, 3, 4, coils 5, 6, 7, 8, and fuel pump, I think. So 6 things on there that all get turned on with ignition. So while I'm terminating these, I'm also terminating the wires coming from the switch panel. So some of these, like the water pump, the fuel pump, the fans, they all have 2 wires on the left side under the terminals. The fans have a wire coming from the Holly and a wire coming from the switch panel to turn them on. Some of the other ones only have a single wire, like the AC, for example. There's only a single wire coming off of the Dominator output harness to turn it on. I don't need to manually turn on the AC compressor, so it's only got 1 wire. right there is pretty much the end of the wiring on the left side of that terminal strip. I've got the wires for everything done, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on the fuel pump output trigger wires. So the wires that are on the right side that actually run out to the front of the car to tell the fans to turn on and off. So those are the two wires that I have in my hand there, green and white, blue and white, and those are fan 1 trigger, fan 2 trigger. And so those are going to go in position 3 and 4 on that terminal strip. If you look, position 1 and 2 are kind of empty, and then 3 and 4 are for the fans. And then 5 through, what's that going to be, 12, 5 through 13, whatever, is for the relay board itself. But yeah, so these wires go on the right side because they're telling the relays that I'm gonna have it at the front of the car to turn on. And with those terminations done, that pretty much takes us to the conclusion of this video. So as always, if you have stuck around this long, I'd like to thank you for viewing, and we'll catch you in the next one.